Well, this is yet another edition of Cambridge Inside Out. This is, what's today's date? This is the
December 21st.
22nd.
Second, sorry.
Yesterday was the
Today's
winter
Tuesday.
solstice,
That's right.
2015.
Oh, I forgot about that.
So
But it's only 60 degrees. That's why I forgot about
That's
it.
right. We're now officially in winter, and it feels like spring outside.
Right. So, Robert Winters.
And Judy Nathans.
Here we are.
And we have maybe a few things just to say about the very last City Council meeting of the year, which took place
Last evening.
last night up at City Hall. And then our plan was to spend today kind of taking a walk, kind of a retrospect
Yes.
of the 2014-2015 City Council, and maybe a few other things around town along the way.
But that's, yeah. I mean, Robert keeps track of all this because he goes to all the meetings.
Most of the meetings.
Right, but so you're a good source.
Somebody's got to
It's
do
good to
it.
review it because the council will change just slightly. But
Just slightly, that's right. So, so this was actually one thing I should say right off the bat is the very closing moments of the City Council meeting last night was a very, very heartfelt, pretty impressive speech by Dennis Bensdam, who's leaving the City Council. A very gracious, really class act through and through. So that was pretty good.
Is that recorded anywhere?
Yeah, that you could go. Yeah. Actually, all of the City Council meetings are archived.
Oh,
If you go
okay.
to the City Council page on the city website, you can
nice.
access all of them. So if you want to just go to the end of that, even
Sure.
because the meeting went long, because there were a lot of big business items. Some of which were, I think, arguably the biggest of the big items for those who were into zoning and such was the
everybody, it seems. Yeah.
modifications. There was a zoning amendment to change the MXD district, which is part of Kendall Square.
What does that stand for? MDX?
Oh boy, you stumped me.
I know, because I see all these acronym things.
Yeah, I know the answer, and it's just I'm spacing out on it.
That's not the Volpe, it's a totally
No,
different
it's
thing.
not. MXD district is pretty much when it goes from the point where the Marriott Hotel is,
Yes.
where Broadway and Main Street split, up past, including Ames Street, and up to the next block, I guess, which is all the way up to Binney. I think that's all MXD.
Isn't that MIT?
No, MIT is on the other side of Main Street.
Oh, okay.
So this was really, it was the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority historically took charge of all the acquisition. They actually had eminent domain authority.
Oh.
Consolidated parcels, cleared land, chose a developer, Boston Properties, back when it was actually they were taking a real risk investing in Kendall Square. It's kind of funny thinking about that now, looking back.
Yeah.
But back then they really were going out on a limb, and now everybody says, Boston Properties, they're just enriching themselves, but they actually did take a risk in the early days.
Yeah.
So there were some amendments to the Kendall Square Urban Renewal Plan, KS-ERP. They had to do an amendment for that. And there was also some zoning modifications, primarily to encourage housing infill in the MXD district. So it was a long process. I think the executive director of the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority said there had been, I believe, 40 meetings total of various sorts leading up to this point. And it wasn't 100% sure that the votes were there, though I felt they were going to be.
And it had to be voted either then or it was going to be
Well, the dedeadline was today.
Right,
and,
okay. That's
so
right. I remember you saying that last week.
So they had to either pass it
or it was going to then go
well, they
somewhere.
could have let it expire and then refile it and go through the process again.
All over again, yeah.
But I think there would have been sort of kind of an unethical thing to do because
after all
as
that.
virtually everybody I know said that pretty much everything the city councilors had asked of the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority and Boston Properties to do, they did. And they came back and
Good
to
faith.
sort of, it would have been a breach of faith, I think, to not pass it. So it did pass. Both of the amendments passed on a 7-2 vote. Councilor Toomey voting no, which one could argue that's to some degree sort of a concession to the fact that he lives in East Cambridge. And
True, and they didn't want it?
There's some of the East Cambridge planning team wrote a letter in opposition. you know, again, I'm not trying to say everybody acts in political ways, but
No, but it's his constituents. in
yeah,
some ways,
politically, if it's a 8-1 vote or a 7-2 vote, but the thing still passes, then the thing passes,
Right.
and it doesn't hurt if you're the East Cambridge Council to go on record as being a person who was opposed. So,
Who's the other one?
Craig Kelly.
And that was.
I won't even question why, but.
Okay.
But I think, but one interesting thing was there was actually one late concession made. I think Mayor Marr, sort of initiated it, where they wanted some assurance that some of the housing would actually be available for home ownership. And there was a late concession, so apparently a minimum of 20% of the units developed will actually be available for sale for home ownership opportunities, which is pretty significant.
Yeah.
And considering the proximity with MIT and a lot of the Kendall Square stuff, there would probably be a lot of people who wouldn't mind owning a piece of it and actually living in something they own there. So that was one last concession, and at that point, honestly, I thought it was pretty much a done deal, and then the vote just finalized it.
Yeah.
So that was one big item. Arguably, that was the biggest item. Nobody.
Last night. Okay.
Yeah, there's another part of Kendall Square rezoning is the Volpe petition, but doesn't expire until February, and most people at this point are figuring that's really not ready for prime time.
Okay.
There were another series of ordinance changes that were amendments to the living wage ordinance.
I was reading that. I didn't quite understand what that means.
I won't get into all the particulars of it. But
are we going to fit?
There were
Can the city do that? Can they say you have to pay $15 an hour?
You can't really do that for anyone other than the city. So if the city contracts with janitorial staff or whatever,
I see. So it's who the city hires.
Exactly. This is not to be confused with a minimum wage ordinance that was proposed.
Oh, right. Okay, that's.
And the law department came back and said you can't do that. You don't have the authority to do the wage and price controls.
Okay.
Unless you have to go to the state, and it's not even clear whether the state can control all of that.
All right. So this is living wage versus like. If
I think it's really for So if there's contractors and subcontractors.
All right.
I think probably one of the most significant ordinations that happened last night was actually this community benefits.
That's the other one I was going to ask you about. I wasn't quite understanding what that is either.
My recollection is that some years ago, through ordinance committees when they were passing the Alexandria rezoning and others, there was always this thing where there's these late concessions where the petitioner comes in and say, I'll give you $100,000 to support the Margaret Fuller House, or I'll give you do this or do that.
And where does that money go to?
The Foundry Building, by the way, which is something we'll also mention here briefly. That actually came about as sort of mitigation as part of the Alexandria rezoning. So, but it would often happen as sort of in a helter-skelter way on the night of ordination for a zoning petition that these benefits would be. And
then where does that money go to?
Well, in the past, it would be dedicated so the petitioner would just pay it directly to something.
Something. Yeah, but where is it?
They said we agree to support a scholarship or something like that.
All right.
So there was a notion expressed by, I think, Councillor Seidel was one of the chief proponents of it at the time, but he wasn't the only one, to do this in a more systematic way so that developers would actually contribute some sizable sum of money into a fund, which would then, there would be some logical process through which mitigation would then be dispensed.
And it's called community, or is it? I thought that was a community trust fund or something.
Well, there's an open space trust, there's an affordable housing trust.
So I don't. That's confusing.
This set up another one, and it's available. You can support some of the local nonprofits. There's an advisory board or a board that gets.
So somebody's managing, overseeing these funds.
Yeah, to make recommendations. Ultimately, it's city funds, so. The city has to basically approve.
But who's keeping track of when it's being allocated?
Well, actually, that was one of the things that happened last night. So there's this cascade of appropriations where the city council approves it. They ordain this community benefit fund, or an ordinance really that had been in the works for some time, and then there was this like $15 million or more of appropriations for for the construction of new parks, for the design of a bridge over, well, which may or may not get built one day, but for the preliminary design work
Who
for.
was submitting it? Well, I don't understand. What do you
So
mean
the manager basically put in all these appropriation orders.
And they have that money in that fund?
It was, yeah, so it was waiting for the
Oh,
ordinance
my
to be
goodness.
passed so that they could then actually start spending the money.
So there's that kind
The
of
money,
money.
the
there.
money from all the various developments that have
Yeah.
been happening over the last decade or more have basically been going into a fund unexpended.
Earning interest.
And earning,
Well,
well,
not-
some
maybe
interest.
not much interest,
right?
but
But it's been this
I didn't
big kitty
realize
of
this.
money, and then all these benefits were
Oh.
promised, and then last night they appropriated an
So it
enormous
all-
amount of money.
They had to do it by the end of the calendar year? Was that
No,
right?
they didn't have to, but the thing is that it was a sort of a fitting close to the council term to actually finish, do the ordination, have the vehicle all now made official, and then they did the expenditures.
So community benefit could be almost anything.
No, there's
What
some.
were some, did you hear
You
some
can't.
of
There
the?
are state laws that say you can't just sort of say, "Well, we decided to give Robert Winters."
No, not an
$100,000.
individual, but say like, I don't know, schools or something.
Yeah, you could.
So what
you
were
certainly
some of
could.
the appropriations?
A lot of it was for park designs. A lot of it, and actually, there always has been an understanding here that since
Yeah.
so much of the development was rooted in East Cambridge, that
It
that
would
there was
be
sort of a
benefit that
yeah.
area.
It's not. There's no obligation to do so, but there was some sort of
Sure.
desire.
Kind of
to-
earmarked for that.
Yeah, to sort of, so there was a lot that was going towards
So
some of
parks
the
and-
parks and things in around East
Huh.
Cambridge. So
Oh,
that was a
wow.
pretty significant thing.
Yeah.
A lot of money got spent.
That
yeah.
is a lot of money.
Yeah, oh, yeah. One other thing I thought was pretty interesting, it had been an order a couple months ago for, as part of this whole master plan or citywide plan
Yes.
or whatever they're going to end up calling it
Yeah.
for next year, that there would be certain early action items. Somehow, for political reasons, I think, the Alewife area kind of got put in the head of the queue. But there was a push here from a city councilor several weeks ago calling for a comprehensive housing policy to be made an early action item as part of the citywide plan. And at the time I thought, well, that's kind of silly because housing
Is
and a
part of
housing
the
plan
whole-
is sort of like the central riding
Exact- right.
theme,
Of the whole thing.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it seems,
Ours is
so
different,
what are we gonna
yeah.
do? We're gonna just do that up front and then just hang out for the rest
Yeah.
of the time?
Yeah.
So they basically said, this community development department came back and says, no, we're just gonna, this is just part of the whole process. It'll be fully integrated and we're not gonna do it as sort of a separate thing done early. I
Okay.
thought that was,
Yeah.
great wisdom. Anyway, there were a few other things to be said. I think, various things ordained before the end of the council term. A few things, as it turns out, zoning petitions actually do not die with the end of a city council.
Okay.
But everything else pretty much does, unless the,
So if a policy or something has not come back for any recommendation, you have to resubmit it or something?
pretty much you have to
Okay.
resubmit it, yeah. I mean, the manager might just come back with a response anyway, but the
Right.
thing
Oh,
is
can he
that,
come back for the response
but-
in the next year?
yeah, it
Okay.
could, but the thing is that pretty much anything that was on a waiting report just goes away.
Interesting.
And,
Wouldn't it
you
be
know,
nice if one's lives were like, oh, we don't have to
Right.
do that.
yeah,
Go away.
yeah, just a reset, a
Mm.
do-over.
All right,
Right.
so that was last night's, and
Yeah.
then, of course, the next meeting is the big one, it's where they.
Yeah, so the next
move-
one will be January
January 4th,
4th is
yeah.
inaugural day.
Right,
And, Jan Devereaux will take a seat alongside the 8 incumbents
Right.
to form the new city council. And later that day, on January 4th, they'll also do the inauguration of the school committee. I think,
oh, it's the same day,
usually it's late afternoon,
okay,
yeah. It's also when I go back to teach my
Oh.
class during January session at MIT.
okay.
So I'll go to the inaugural, I'll eat some food at the inaugural fest.
Maybe I'll go,
and
it's my
go-
birthday, so I'll
I'll teach my
pretend that they're
classes and-
celebrating my birthday, yeah. So do we wanna mention, before we go into year and review, do you wanna mention the participatory voting? I can mention that.
Yeah, we could do that. Actually, if we maybe we can even
Yeah,
put that up
just sweep,
graphically
can you,
if we can.
I think you have
we
to touch
actually have
that
to
first.
do that.
There you go. No,
And-
now you
and
sweep it.
Now we do this. Whoops.
Whoops, it's gonna,
There we go.
there we go.
All right.
So those of you hopefully voted, it was last week. Well, no, it ended on the 12th, but the results were submitted and,
So this
you
is
can
the
read this, but this is for the,
participatory budgeting.
right, budgeting, and about a little less than 4,500 votes were tallied that I could see. And the winners are, if you can read this, the, one of my favorites, the prepared food rescue freezer van was voted in. And there are a couple of bike-related items that got voted in, and a 5 water bottle refill station. Oh, 5, well, that's interesting.
I voted for that.
Oh, good, yeah, that sounds good. Shape up our squares, I'm not sure what that is, because I'm not sure I voted for it. Faster, better bus for Cambridge, number 1, and that has, if you can see, that's $250,000. It's a large, it's almost a third of the money that was allocated for the whole process. And that is what we decided, that's like it's a signal system that's gonna allow these buses to move through more quickly on green lights.
I'm guessing it's probably similar to what happens with emergency vehicles, where there's a strobe light gets triggers it and it changes the light to green to allow the emergency vehicles to get through.
But without the sirens, hopefully.
Without the sirens, so this might be something similar.
And then one surprising, I guess, the chairs for the Cambridge Public Schools. I mean, I guess they don't have enough money in their own budget, but hey, it must have gotten a good constituency to vote for them, because there we go. And so we'll go now back to...
All right. Yeah. So back to the humans.
The humans, okay, and now we're going to...
All right, so one of the things we sort of thought about doing recently was this week at least, do sort of a retrospective, kind of a look back over the full city council term and a few other things. And it's not such an easy thing to do because, you know, people love to be dismissive. They'll say, well, nothing, these people, they're do-nothing councilors. They didn't do a thing. They accomplished nothing. The actual record shows otherwise. You know, it's actually pretty substantial. I was sort of putting together, and next thing you know, there were like 9 pages of notes of substantial things.
Yes, them out. It's a lot.
So, I mean, it's scattered. It's an interesting mix of ideas that were expressed that went nowhere.
Right.
Certainly, but that's not surprising. Some things that were talked about greatly, but then they're still in litigation, you know, like the Sullivan Courthouse, where there's nothing the city council can do to expedite that. It's where it is. There were meetings all about STEAM and STEM.
Right.
I'm not 100% sure whether anything tangible has come out of that.
Okay.
That's sort of a disappointment. But, you know, there were zoning petitions, some of which were contentious.
That seemed to be predominate the development and housing affordability.
Yeah, I don't know that it is. It
Well,
naturally is, but it certainly gets
Twining,
a lot of it gets
all the names, you know, just
certainly development seems to draw the most flies.
right.
There's a lot of people come out to public comment, get very excited about development issues.
And also,
But arguably, you know, if the city could actually figure out a way of developing employment opportunities for kids who are, you know, growing up in poverty, that would be a lot more significant, I think, than the development issues. But that's also a harder problem to solve.
people don't. There's not enough money behind that, I guess.
Right.
You know.
So I was just joking around when on the way out the door tonight. I just sort of made what arguably is sort of like a word cloud of.
So just imagine this now as he says.
Right. So this is going to sound totally nonsensical, but bear with me. We'll put in a little more detail in it. So, for in terms of things of significance,
It kept appearing in the.
appearing and reappearing, or were
Yes.
somewhat significant. Nexus study leading to incentive zoning.
Okay.
Right, linkage payments, which actually was eventually resolved.
Right.
The early on in 2014 was the Foundry Building.
Yes.
And how this Cambridge Redevelopment Authority would play some role.
Can you go back to that after you're done? Because I'd
absolutely.
like to know what the status.
Oh yeah,
of
we'll
that
do this in a little bit more
Okay.
detail.
All right.
The Cambridge Redevelopment Authority itself, it's complete. You know, it's sprung back like the phoenix. It's back to life. It's become one of the most relevant entities in the city right now.
Interesting.
The city loved to pass bans of one form or another. Plastic bags, polystyrene. I think there was some restrictions on further restrictions on tobacco.
Oh, that I missed.
I think there was some desire to do like soda pop, but maybe that was the previous
I didn't see anything.
council. There were a lot of open meeting law things where various people, even up to and including one of the slates of candidates, where somebody decided to make it a big stink of it, as if that was somehow illegal for people to meet to talk about their political futures.
Oh, is that what that was? Wow.
So there was a lot of open meeting law. That was definitely in the word cloud here.
Yes, open meeting law.
The Sullivan Courthouse, which we haven't heard much lately, but early on in 2014 it was a big issue, all the way in through the summer. The master plan.
The master plan.
Which, you know, is turning into the citywide plan. I think by the time we hear next week, they'll announce a new name for it. It's probably going to end up as Envision Cambridge or something like that.
Please.
Yeah, I know. A name is a name is a name.
Yeah.
But people have used the idea of master plan
Right.
as a stalling tactic,
Right.
but also as a good exercise in
Yeah.
thinking through what the future holds. It's funny, it was totally tied to Jan Devereaux's political campaign as well, but it was the new street housing and development in Alewife was a big thing a year
Right,
ago.
because that's that end of it.
It
Yep.
doesn't seem like it's such a big thing now, but then again, I guess the election kind of
Yeah.
took care of it. There were various things on minimum wage and living wage ordinances. There was the Carlone petition of
Which
last
came in
year.
early on when he
Very
was
early
elected
on.
to the council.
And
Yeah.
we'll touch upon it a little bit more. Let's see, I'll skip a few of these things here. Incentive zoning, STEAM and STEM, I think I may have mentioned that.
Right, he did.
And I think something that kind of came a little out of nowhere, but became a very defining thing for the year 2015 was the Mass and Main proposed development, or the
right.
Normandy Twining development
Right.
at Mass and Main,
Right,
simply
that's
in
right,
Central Square.
down the street.
There were community benefits ordinances, we mentioned just briefly. There was a fair amount of back and forth, multiple iterations of this in various city council meetings about what's going to happen with Vale Court in Central Square, which is a sort of, now it's about 15, 20 years, an abandoned property, a very sizable property, that everybody wants something to happen, nothing
I don't
happens.
know where that is.
There's the Volpe site in Kendall Square, which sort of, people for years thought would be a great thing if we could develop housing there, and then when the federal government finally budged and allowed for the possibility, it became kind of a quicksand. I don't know if it's really going anywhere, right? So anyway, that's just a bit of a sampler
Yeah.
of that, and we'll have to take a fair amount of time to walk through some of this in a greater detail, but might as well get started.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the Foundry because I haven't heard much about that lately.
All right, actually, it comes up pretty quick on the list here. So
All
certainly,
right. Because that was in the beginning of the term.
well, the
right?
very, very beginning
Yeah.
of the 2014-15
Right.
term was, of course, the election of David Marr as mayor and Dennis Benzen as vice mayor, right? Which arguably is a formality, but it's certainly
And
kind
that
of
was his first term,
for Dennis.
Dennis,
Yes, absolutely.
as well as Dennis Carlone and Dean.
Exactly. No, not No, you're right. You're right. Absolutely right.
yeah.
Of course, I'm already thinking about next
Yeah.
time, right?
That was a big change for the council.
Yeah, very early on, one of the very first things in January, the city council asked for a new nexus study for the incentive zoning ordinance. This is something you have to do if you want to change the linkage requirement. Now, mention that here because eventually, so the process went forward, and then eventually it was either late summer or fall, I think early fall,
Of 2014.
of 2015.
Oh, 15.
Right, so it
So
took a year and a
later.
half.
Okay.
City council actually changed the incentive. They tripled the linkage
Right.
fees
From
and
4 to 12 or
and
something.
did some other
Yeah.
modifications to increase
Right.
that. So that was something the city council can hang its hat on and say, we accomplished that.
Yeah.
I think, let's see, just sort of jumping through a few of these in here. The Foundry Building, which was a
Right.
property that came into the city's hands as a part of the Alexandria rezoning a few years ago.
Where is that exactly?
That's down on the, I'm sort of pointing to it here.
East Cambridge?
East Cambridge, if you go around where Binney Street wraps
Yeah.
around on the East Cambridge neighborhood side of Binney
Okay.
Street, sort of a block in, there's I think it's what's called the Rogers Street Park. It's an open
Yeah.
park, and then right on the other side of Third Street,
Oh,
there's
that's
this
what that is. Okay.
brick, kind of interesting old industrial-looking building that
Interesting. Okay.
some people wanted it for an arts center, people
Right.
wanted it for STEM and STEAM and all of that.
And what is it?
Well, the thing is that so there was absolutely no consensus. There were estimates made early in 2014 as to what could happen, what should happen, and
And how much
costly.
it would cost? So no developer, we're not, I mean,
Well,
the city is not a developer. They
No, but
get a developer,
but
right?
somebody suggested early on
Yeah.
that maybe the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority, which is sort of had been springing back to life,
Yeah.
could play a role in facilitating the future of the Foundry. And sure
Okay.
enough, that was
Yeah.
approved. The
Oh.
city did a disposition of the property. The redevelopment has some control of it now. And there was by the time I think September of 2015 rolled around, so again about a year and a half time frame.
Yeah.
It was actually right up in the queue where there was an advisory committee set up, and pretty much they're in a position now where they can actually start
So there's an advisory committee and people have been meeting about it.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it, but the thing is that the whole future is in process now. It's not like the city council is debating it anymore. They're just
Okay.
basically waiting for good things to happen, which will presumably happen in the next year or so.
But eventually it has to go off to bid, is that what
Yep,
it is?
but the thing
Okay.
is that it's not like the city is not the one who's even putting it out to bid, so it's just something I think will be managed through if I'm not mistaken, through the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority.
So they are not, they're a quasi-city?
They're an independent authority,
They
but the thing
are,
is
okay.
they actually get money generated, even as a result of the rezoning that they did last night. They will, a certain amount of money will come in that they can actually use to help to fund some of these projects.
Okay.
So things are actually working. I mean,
Yeah.
in my opinion, the city council should feel proud of itself for
Yeah.
making the right decisions to sort of move this along. I mean, I think there were some people with the Foundry Building had some personal desires
Right.
that it should be almost like their own clubhouse for their
Right.
projects, but
Right.
but it is a public asset. It's not
Right.
for any individual or group of individuals to
Right.
control. So it's actually, I think it has worked out as well as could be expected,
Okay.
right? So we have about a minute or so in
Alright,
this
so
in
one
here.
more thing that briefs that we could.
We just see here. Let's see. Oh yeah, one other thing. This is actually will probably roll over into it. Is also early on in 2014 there was a lot of controversy over the future of the Sullivan Courthouse down on Thorndike Street, and that eventually by the end of the summer, the planning board had because there was a special permit process associated with it, and the planning board actually granted, as they should have, the special permits necessary. But then it led to litigation, and we'll see what the future holds
So
in
who
terms
owns that building?
well, that was the state owns it until it's fully disposed of and sold off to the developers.
Oh, okay, it sounds like the Volpe situation, because the federal government owns that.
Yeah, but
and
here
it's-
this was in the hands of the Division of Capital Assets Management for the
Okay.
state.
But it's not the city that, okay.
No, it's
I
not
get it.
city.
All right.
Yeah, so they
All these
control city
entities.
controls zoning and such,
Right,
but
they control the actual, okay,
the asset.
disposition.
So anyway, that's in court.
All right.
Most of the decisions have been sort of summarily dismissed, but that's still not fully adjudicated, and that'll get worked out pretty soon.
Interesting.
So we're down to just a
Yeah.
few seconds here, so we're going to take a 3-minute break, and we'll be back shortly.
The second
So
segment for Cambridge Inside Out,
see you then.
part 2, coming up.